Witch Nightlight Polymer Clay Sculpture Tutorial by HotPinkZebraPaper, and this is going to be part 1, which is going to be where I show you the sculpting of this. So it's not going to be any of the painting or the fabrication or anything like that, just sculpting with polymer clay. For the rest of the video and the rest of the details on how I did everything else, check the description box below for links to the other videos and the other parts of this tutorial. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fit my light to my base. And so I have just a wooden base, and then I'm going to wrap my little light with plastic wrap just so it won't get all yucky with the clay, and then I'm going to sculpt around it with polymer clay. And then after I get it so it fits nice and there isn't too big of a hole around the light itself, then I'm just going to take the light out and bake that. While that's baking, I am making the base for my cauldron, and so I'm going to start with just some aluminum foil and form it into the shape of a cauldron with my hands without a bottom or a top. So it's going to be sort of like a tube shape that curves in a little bit at the top and the bottom, and then wrap that with some masking tape. The reason I wrap this with the masking tape is so that the aluminum foil doesn't move. It's going to make it a lot more stiff, and so it's not going to change shape on you. And also it's going to make it a little smoother as well. So the aluminum foil has a lot of bumps in it. Once you put the masking tape on, it smooths a lot of that out. So then I'm going to roll out a sheet of polymer clay with my little pasta maker, and it's at the thickest setting I have, and then I'm going to wrap that around it, smooth it down, cut off the excess clay from the top and the bottom of the cauldron, and then I'm going to be sculpting out a skull to put on the front of the cauldron as a little decoration. So I just first formed the basic shape with my hands, and then with some dotting tools and a knife I'm going to sculpt out the rest of it. So I'm going to start with the eye sockets and then work on the nasal cavity, and then the cheekbones, etc., working my way down. And really for sculpting a skull, I found a photo on the internet that showed a skull from a whole bunch of different angles. It was a computer rendering, but it just showed different sides and different angles, as I said, so you get different perspectives. That is such a helpful tool if you don't have like a skeleton figure that you can look at. Then I'm going to roll out a long snake that I'm going to make for the rim of the cauldron and just make sure that that fits, and then bake the cauldron and the rim. For my witch, I'm going to start with a wire structure for her skeleton basically, and I'm going to do her legs and her arms and then just a little bit for her neck. I'm going to tape the legs together just to make sure that they stay in place while I continue to work, and then I'm going to start wrapping her with aluminum foil, making sure to bulk out the areas that need to be bulked out. And I'm not going to do any product on her legs at all, just down a little bit about halfway through her thighs. I want the bottoms of her legs to stay bendable with the wire. And so I'm going to make sure that I bulk out like her shoulders and her breasts and her thighs and her butt and her stomach, and just start working on creating her form, and then also add some for her head, and then wrap the foil with the masking tape as well. Same reason, just to smooth it out and hold it together. And like I said, just create her shape. I wanted her to have a very real woman shape, so I didn't want her to have like a really tiny waist and all of that. So I gave her, a little bit of a tummy and round hips and all that good stuff. And so, but you can make her any shape you want. It's up to you. So I'm just going to keep wrapping her wrap the aluminum foil in the masking tape until she looks like a little mummy. That is all I could think about as I was wrapping her in the masking tape, is that this looked just like a mummy. And then I'm going to, once again, I just rolled out a couple sheets of polymer clay with my pasta machine still on the thickest setting, and I'm just going to wrap her up in it, create a nice thin layer of clay over all of the masking tape. Actually, that's a lie. It's not quite all of the masking tape. I didn't cover her legs very far, but all of the tape that will eventually show. So I'm just going to keep sculpting her around, and at this particular stage I am not doing too much detail. I'm not like sculpting out her hands or doing much else. I just want her to have a nice soft shape at this particular stage. And you might be thinking, why do I have to sculpt out her butt and her stomach and everything? Because that's going to be covered in her dress. I didn't want to just leave it with the aluminum foil because that's not quite smooth. And with the clay, as you smooth it out, you can get to have a nice, really smooth finish on it, which is what I wanted. And it's going to be a lot stronger this way. So you want to make sure that her hips are going to be a stress point for the wire, because that's going to be where there's a lot of support from there, and she bends just a little bit. She's kind of leaning over, and so you want to make sure that you have a decent amount of clay on there to really give that some strength. So now I'm going to start adding details to her face, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sculpt out her jaw. That was not in place before before this point her head was just like an oval. So you get that jaw in there, and that's going to help you so much as like the base frame for the entire design. And then I added some thickness to her cheekbones, and now I'm going to start sculpting out her nose, which I'm sorry I'm off camera. I'm just blending that in and then pulling out some clay at the bottom for her nostrils. And I'm going to sort of carve out her eye sockets with a dotting tool. Just start digging the clay out from in that area and smooth them over just so it's not like a harsh line, it's a little softer. Just like so. And then I'm going to take a ball of clay for each eye. I'm going to place those in, and then take a snake and then roll that out and flatten it, and then wrap that around her eyes to make her eyelids. And it did take a couple little pieces. This is extremely thin clay at this point, what I was using for her eyelids. And so especially on the top, I used a couple pieces. You might be wondering why I had to gouge out the eye sockets and then just fill them back in again. It's my process, and I think it works better to just sort of start from the ground up. And so it's almost like making her skull first and then adding everything that goes on top of it, which is kind of how I like to think of it. So I just took out her eye sockets and then put her eyes in there. That's how I like to do things. And then I'm going to add her lips, and I want her to have fairly thin lips, but I do want her to be smiling. So just once again, little snakes that I blended out. And now I'm going to be adding a little more clay to her breasts. I do want her to have cleavage, and I do want, and it's not, and that is going to show. So I'm just going to add some more clay in that area, make sure that there's a definite line separating them. You don't want her to have a uniboob, as some people might say. And I'm just going to sculpt that out. I'm going to add a little more clay to her stomach. I want her to have, just a nice, round, soft, almost grandmothery appearance. Not really, but you know what I mean. I want her to look approachable. And then I'm going to sculpt her hands. For the one hand that's going to be holding her stir stick, I'm going to just take, and I have a little piece of aluminum foil that's rolled up that I'm going to use as sort of a placeholder for her stick later on. And I just put that in there because I know I can take that out later. And I'm going to sculpt her hand around it so that I know how that is. And I'm just going to keep working on it. And the hands for me are definitely the most difficult part of this entire process. I force myself to sculpt hands and to paint hands. If it was up to me, I never would, because hands are really one of the most difficult things. And so if you're curious, originally I was not going to give her gloves. I wanted her to have long, dainty looking fingers with fingernails. As I was sculpting this, I decided that I should change my mind and just give her gloves. They can be a little bit bulkier. They don't have to look as thin that way. And it would just be easier for me, which I try to make myself do things that aren't in my comfort zone, and sculpting hands are definitely not in my comfort zone. However, there gets to be a point where it's like, okay, I've had enough out of my box for one day. I'm just going to make them gloves, give it a ruffle, and call it a day, which is what happened. That's where that went with that. And in the end, I do actually like her gloves. I think it kind of adds to her sort of almost masquerade-y appearance. So it worked out, but that wasn't my initial plan. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. But then I'm going to wrap a piece of copper wire with some polymer clay for her stir stick. And then I'm going to be sculpting 3 frogs. The frog's body starts out as a teardrop, and then you add arms and legs. And the arms have 1 bend in them for their elbow, and the legs have 2 bends in them. So all my frogs have a different pose. I am only showing you actually sculpting one, though. It's the same process. You just change the way the legs are bent a little bit, and then you have yourself different posed frogs. You can pose them however you want. Once you get the first one done, you'll see how their anatomy works, and then you got it. So just like I said, the legs have 2 bends, and the front arms have 1. I'm going to gouge out the eye sockets, give him eyes and eyelids like I did for my witch. So there I'm adding the eyelids just with thin pieces, blending it out like so. Add a couple little nostrils too. I added those at one point. So just the circles for the eyes and then the eyelids. And that is it for all of the stuff that I sculpted with polymer clay. Like I said, check the description box for the links to the videos where I show all of the rest of this wonderful sculpturing. And I will see you in my next video. Bye!